This presentation will explore foundations of learning. First, we will look at the root of learning and how the brain functions. Using this knowledge, how can teachers help students learn to think and make thinking visible in the classroom? Using another text from Ron Ritchart, I will share insight on how to create a culture of thinking. Wolf provides this figure as a model of information processing. The brain is always sensing: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Our brains act as filters, and almost 99% of sensory input is filtered out. Basic functioning would be limited, and there would be limited chance of survival if the brain processed 100% of the stimuli we experience. What if our attention was drawn to the sense of our clothes touching our skin at all times? We wouldn't be able to pay attention to anything else. The sensory receptors create a sensory memory. The initial process is to translate this information into the working memory. Education typically takes the role of rehearsing information to develop working memory. Neither sensory or working memory is transferred to the next stage and is therefore forgotten. Long-term memories are formed when the brain has the opportunity to elaborate or make connections, and this process is aided by the intentional organization of information. Making thinking visible is one example of how to do so. When the brain receives a sense, the receptor is sent to the sensory cortex. This is a literal transformation of the sense into the form of a perception. We do not see light, we perceive light. Perception refers to the meaning that we make of the light. That perception then captures the attention of the brain. Teachers often notice a student not paying attention. This is actually not true. This is an instance of an example where a child is not paying attention to the task preferred by the teacher. We are always paying attention to something. Our attention is selective. The initial processing stage is not a conscious process. While we can focus our attention on something specific, this is not the case most of the time. It would not be possible for the brain to directly determine where to focus attention all of the time. Connecting meaning and attention. The brain processes the information and is always looking for connections. If no connection is made, the meaning is deemed novel, and it may retain in short term, but not in the long-term memory. If connections are made, attention is captured. The connection between the receptor and the area of the brain that processes emotion is a shorter pathway than other pathways. It's actually only one synapse long and is able to receive the information approximately a quarter of a second sooner than other pathways. This is the literal biological explanation as to why emotion drives attention and therefore learning. So, how can teachers utilize what we know about the brain to engage students? One strategy is to intentionally develop the ability to think. What kind of thinking do you value and want to promote in your classroom? Students and people think to learn, but also must learn to think. This is a skill that is natural, but also taught. Students learning how to be critical thinkers or have a growth mindset or facilitate exploring different ideas are examples of types of thinking. So Ron Ritchart's work focused on using thinking to aid understanding by observing closely and describing what's there, building explanations and interpretations, reasoning with evidence, making connections, considering different viewpoints and perspectives, and capturing the heart and forming conclusions. A culture of thinking is a place where a group's collective and individual thinking is valued, visible, and actively promoted for all group members. A popular educational psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, studied the social influence of learning. People learn what they are surrounded by. Teachers can positively influence students using this concept by creating a classroom where thinking is taught, valued, and nurtured for all learners. So how can you create a classroom that is a culture of thinking and not just work? One example is reframing homework to be learning at home, or instead of taking a field trip, we're going to go and have field work. Another question to ask yourself is, how would you teach differently if you didn't test for a year? Ron Ritchart poses this question in the book, Creating a Culture of Thinking. He ascertains that creating a culture of thinking creates time for thinking. He encourages us to be non-directive, to press for thinking, support student autonomy, and foster inquiry-based learning. A culture of thinking encourages deep learning versus surface learning. We support students becoming independent versus dependent, and fosters a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And in this course, we will explore several models that encourage deep learning, independence, and a growth mindset, such as understanding by design and project-based learning.